berths and the head opened and closed. The man above us nodded and said something else, and another man filled the narrow passage that led to our berth. He reached up to the dome light on the ceiling and flicked it on. He wore the same helmet and optical device. His rifle was slung over his shoulder, and he held a handgun with a black barrel and yellow grip. It was pointed at Natsumi. "Get dressed," the man above us said. "My clothes are in the salon," said Natsumi. The man in the passageway backed up. She slid off the bed and shuffled after him, using the sheet to form a makeshift kimono. I was in a pair of loose flowered shorts. I grabbed a t-shirt left nearby and stepped into my flip-flops. In the salon, the man felt through a stack of Natsumi's clothes, then watched her put on underwear, shorts, bra, and t-shirt. She tried to put on a pair of sneakers, but he shook his head and said with a soft Spanish accent, "Nothing you can run in, baby." He tossed her a pair of flip-flops that matched mine, forcing the recollection of when we'd bought them 2 months before, ashore on Tortola. Then he frisked me, his hands large, strong, and deft. Hands that said, "I will crush you if you even hint at resistance." He emptied my pockets of wallet, chapstick, and Swiss Army knife. We were directed up the companionway to the cockpit, where we walked into a bright light. I looked down and saw scuffs on the cockpit floor. I remembered absurdly that I was nearly out of black skid remover. The light flicked off, and in my near blindness I counted the shapes of 3 men. One of them gripped my arm and moved me around the helm and down to the swim platform. Natsumi bumped into me from behind, so I knew she was still with us. An inflatable boat was tied to the swim ladder. A 4th man was in the boat behind the wheel. He was in a wetsuit, his face blacked out so only the whites of his eyes caught the beam from the flashlight as it slashed through the heavy night air. I imagined him in the water, harnessed to the inflatable, using a slow, silent breaststroke to pull the commando-filled boat across the bay. We were forced into the boat and placed side by side on a bench suspended between the pontoons. One of the men put a zip tie around my wrist, then looped another through a lifeline and cinched it tightly. They did the same with Natsumi. The inflatable rocked crazily as the men found their positions and released the tether from our boat. One of them slapped the helm, and the man in the wetsuit started the twin engines, nearly silent despite their impressive size. The boat dug into the water as we spun away and motored out of the cove and into the moonlit ocean, bucking against the waves, causing an occasional burst of sea spray to douse our t-shirts. I held tight to the lifeline and tried to ignore the plastic zip tie cutting into my wrist. I slipped my free arm around Natsumi's waist, and she put hers around mine, and we held firmly against the watery motion and the dread-filled darkness. The motion of the boat as it rose and fell over flat, lazy swells told me we were well into the Caribbean when one of the men put a black hood over Natsumi's head, then one over mine. Now the wave action became more keenly felt, and the sound of the pontoons slapping at the water and the deep hum of the twin outboards filled my mind. Natsumi pressed hard into me, her message, "I'm frightened, but I'm okay. I just need to know you're there next to me." The men in the boat said nothing. I understood the futility of asking questions. No words of mine would change the fact that we were utterly in their power, and yet our own silence seemed to enforce a perverse equality. Emotional distance in defiance of physical helplessness. My breath, trapped inside the cloth hood, smelled foul. It must be what fear smells like to dogs, I thought, a pungent, degraded smell. After at least another hour, the boat suddenly slowed and changed direction. Now more perpendicular to the swells, we flopped over peak and trough. Then I felt fresh acceleration and another sharp turn. We were maneuvering. The men started moving around, throwing random undulations into the natural pitch and roll. I heard a voice speaking low, then a response. The motors dropped down to idle, and the gear lever was slipped into neutral. We bumped into something immovable, knocking me into Natsumi. She breathed in sharply and her body tensed. A voice came from outside and above the boat. I heard the whir of an electric wing.